Welcome to the Red Flag Coaches Podcast. I'm Dr. Tracy Knighton, Dr. T.
And I'm Lawrence Knighton, the other half.
And we're here to talk about everything relationships and red flags. So let's start at the beginning. What are red flags and why are they so important?
You know, red flags are any actions, attitudes, and behaviors that you see that can cause a potential problem, such as jealousy, such as always wanting to know your every move, such as always being inattentive. Those are some simple red flags that we sometimes overlook that end up costing us in the long run.
So as a woman, okay, why do you think we ignore red flags more than men do?
I think women ignore the red flags more so because they may feel like this person will be the one for them. And also they feel as if they can help change the man. And I always try to tell ladies, you cannot change a man. A man will only change because he sees that this is the person that he wants to be with.
So when we think of red flags, oftentimes we look at red flags, like you said, and we think, oh, we can change them to change those red flags to green flags, and then the relationship is okay. But what we fail to understand is that very effort, that very thing that we ignore is always the thing that comes back to burn us in the end.
Absolutely. And here's what's so interesting. I think all of us, if you're of any age, 25, 30, 35, all of us can probably think about a time where we actually overlooked the red flag. And what ends up happening, what I always tell people is the very thing that we overlook in a relationship are generally the very things that come back to bite us. And I'm speaking from experience. All of this is experience for me.
Right. Because we always say what, honey? We always say we are not experts. We're just what?
Experience.
And we want to share our experience with you.
So that you don't make the same mistakes that we made. So listen to me, Linda. Here's the thing. I was in a relationship before, and I've always been sort of an outgoing entrepreneur type person. And I was dating this young lady, and she was more laid back, didn't really have goals and ambitions. I'm like, you know what? If she hangs around me, you know, she may just, you know, jump in and...
You rub off on her a little bit, honey?
Yeah, I just rub off on her a little bit. I did rub off on her, but not that way.
Wait, what?
But here's the point I'm making. We like to keep it real, right?
That's it.
Here's the point I'm making. So that very thing was the very red flag that came back to haunt me because I knew I needed someone who was a go-getter. I needed someone who was motivated on their own.
Right.
And because I felt as if I could help change that person, that was the very thing that came back to haunt me.
Right. So so that we can get an understanding for this, we have what we like to say are green flags. Those are the flags that, you know, keep the relationship going and moving. And then we have yellow flags that kind of make you want to pause and take a step back and kind of notice things. And then we have the red flags, just like the red shirt we got on, right? That just kind of make you kind of stop and go, wait, what? And then we have what I call the flags on fire. Red flags that you ignore always become flags on fire.
Absolutely.
And so like you were explaining in your relationship, the very thing that you wanted in a woman, that you could say, okay, this is how I could change her to make her to be the woman that I want her to be, was the very thing that became a flag on fire for you because you were not able to get out of her what you needed to make the relationship flourish.
Exactly. And here's another thing. I remember sharing with this young lady because she was telling me that her new friend, he's always calling, always checking on her like 7, 8, 9, 10 times a day and always want to know where she is.
That's starting to sound like red flags.
I tried to tell her, I said, listen, it's one thing to be concerned about a person,
right?
But it's another thing to know when it's dangerous.
Right.
I said, that's a person who's going to end up being more or less controlling and being one of those people that is going to end up costing you more than you want to pay. And so what's so interesting is she went back and told the guy what I said.
Wow.
For me, you know, it's no
You
big
ain't never
deal.
scared, huh?
I ain't never scared. I'm like bone crusher. I ain't never scared. But the point I'm making is, so even though he confronted me about it, I said, sure. I said, there's a difference between, I said, because she came to me like a big brother. And I said, I want to at least help her to understand whether she wanted to admit it or not or believe it or not, that was going to be the very thing that came back to haunt her. And guess what? That was the very thing that came back to haunt her, because she discovered that he was very controlling and he was very jealous.
Yeah.
And that's why I was trying to help her to understand, I know what a red flag looks like, because I've crossed over a whole lot of them, just overlooked them, and they came back to haunt me.
Yeah, I often say that you're the big brother that we wish we had when we were dating.
That's right.
Because particularly for women, we ignore a lot of things in hopes that we get our happily ever after. See, young ladies are taught early on how to live that fairy tale life. And so when we start dating, what's the first thing we start doing? We start practicing our last name with his last name so we can get to happily ever after. But in doing that, we forget the process that gets us there. And oftentimes it's those red flags that we ignore that come back to burn us in the end.
Absolutely. And I want to say this because I think it's so critical for us as we start this podcast to make sure that our main focus is to help you to avoid the pitfalls, to avoid the red flags, to avoid those things that cost you heartbreak. Because the thing about it is, if you learn to take in the advice that we're going to give in these podcasts, I promise you, it will help you avoid a lot of heartbreak down the road.
Yeah. So some of those red flags that we talked about early on was controlling behaviors, was the jealousy, was the emotional unavailability of people. You know, another red flag could be those boundary violations. How many times have we worked with couples or we work with individuals and they lack boundaries? And a boundary is simply this. What is your limit? What is your limit of the things that you're going to take?
Right.
What's your limit in somebody lying to you? What's your limit in somebody ignoring you? What's your limit in somebody not telling you the truth about things? What's your limit in you finding out the truth later on and it's a complete lie of what they told you before? What's your limit on that? What's your limit on not being compatible when it comes to you saying, oh, well, I really like to go to the movies, but he don't like to go to the movies, so we just stay at home. See, those are those boundary violations. See, one of my non-negotiables, I look at boundary violations like non-negotiables, like the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not. Thou shalt not put thy hand upon me and call me out of thy name. That's one of my boundaries. And so it stems from my childhood and growing up in the household that I grew up in with my 2-parent household, knowing what that was. But can I be honest with you all? Here's the truth of the matter. I didn't know those boundaries the first time I got married.
I agree.
And it was the more that I got to know Tracy, the better Tracy was to Tracy, number one. And then the better Tracy was for the person who was coming along, so that when the next relationship evolved, I was a better version of me, taking care of me first.
And the thing about boundaries, most people have not been taught about boundaries.
Oh, yeah.
We just started hearing that word boundaries in the last few years.
Right.
Because in our culture, for the most part, we weren't really talking about what is a boundary.
Oh, yeah. You just stayed in a relationship no matter what happened.
No question. Because that's what our parents, foreparents, and the rest, they actually didn't really set boundaries per se, because in that day, it was just a totally different mindset as it relates to relationships and marriages. So you have a lot of those 80s and 70s. When I say 80s, I'm saying those are in the 80s now.
Okay.
Those are in their late 70s. The men, for the most part, had sometimes in our culture a lot of outside children, or not necessarily a lot, but they had
Papa
outside
was
children.
a rolling stone. Doom, doom,
Please don't
doom,
sing.
doom.
And so what ends up happening,
Come on, honey, you're supposed to join in with me.
I don't know what note you're on. But anyway, and so in that day, they actually covered up a lot of stuff.
Right.
Families covered up a lot of. Let me
Right.
give a good example. I was just talking to somebody last week, literally. And they asked me, did I know this young lady who lives here? And I would give the name, but it's not.
In our city?
Yeah, here in the city.
Okay.
So when I was working with Chick-fil-A, I was in Terrell County. And I was at one of the schools, and I saw this lady there. And I asked her, I said, do you have a sister in Albany that's a principal at one of the schools? She says, no, not that I know of. I said, I promise you, you've got a sister in Albany that looks exactly like you. I asked her, I said, can I take your picture? She said, yes. I took her picture. I sent the picture to her and her husband. To the one I said was her sister and the sister's husband. And the husband sent me back a message, text message saying, she looks more like my wife than her other biological sister.
Wow.
So what ended up happening is that I connected those two together. So the lady here asked her grandma, did dad have any other children? And she says, yes, he did. Those two met around Christmas time, probably about 10, 11 years ago.
Right.
They were sisters and never knew it. So here's the point I'm making. You start talking about boundaries.
Right.
They, in that day and age, they didn't know anything about boundaries. So they put up with a lot of things that they normally would not.
Because they thought they had to.
Because they thought they had to.
Right.
And that's the same thing even now, that women put up with a lot of things because they feel like they have to, because they don't know self. And secondly, they really don't know God.
And you were right here when I was about to say low self-esteem. So when we view ourselves in a lower level, what ends up happening is we settle for anything.
Exactly.
And in settling for anything, believe it or not, that actually makes you feel worse than when you got started. And so life has a way of just tearing us down and beating us down. But here's the thing, until we build ourselves up, until we recognize who we are first, before we even get into a relationship, we will always do what I say is sell your soul to the devil. And so what ends up happening is now you're in a relationship trying to feel a certain way, hoping that the man will make you feel important so that now you can feel important enough to yourself first. But see, that's backwards. I started to say it like my dad used to say the A word backwards. Y'all know what I'm talking about. If y'all from South Georgia, y'all know how they say it down here. But you are to build yourself up first before you get into a relationship, so that when you get into the relationship gets the best of you.
Right.
But women, we get it backwards. We want to go in and we want to fix the person to make the person be the person we want them to be. We look at it like a project.
Right.
But relationships should not be a project. You bring the best of you to the relationship. So now I don't have to work on you and you don't have to work on me. Now, don't get me wrong. There are some things that we do together.
Sure.
Because now this version of Tracy is not the version you married 22 years ago.
I agree. I helped calm you down. I sure did.
Wait, what?
So let me deal with this also, this part about this self-esteem, because a lot of times women, for the most part, are also looking for external validation.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
External validation is a major issue for a lot of women.
So why do you think women are always looking for that external validation?
I think because they have internal issues. I think the internal issues that they have dealt with in their past, or not feeling like they were enough, things of that nature, has caused them to want to find external validation. Or say, for instance, if dad wasn't in their lives, dads have a way of really helping. When I say dads, I'm talking real dads. Right. Have a way of helping their daughters to know what a relationship looks like, how a man's supposed to treat a woman.
Because they're our first heroes.
Right. And so when that is not there, what ends up happening, they look for validation because they didn't get it from the other sources. Yeah. So when I say other sources, I'm talking about like dad or somebody in the family that can help them to understand how important, how valuable they are.
But I think, too, another part of that, too, is because I grew up in a two-parent household. I had a dad who was very, very active in my life, still is. And we look at how men in general play games. And how men in general, and you're a man all day long, and you know how men will start out playing games with women. How early does this game actually start?
Well, you got to understand, and this is not for all men, but for most men who are men now, when we were boys, and I like talking about this, when we were boys, we were always asked the question, what's your girlfriend's name?
Okay, did y'all get that, ladies?
Man, what's your girlfriend?
Ladies, listen carefully, because he's giving you the code right now.
So here it is, you're 6 years old. Somebody's asking you, what's your girlfriend's name? Like, man, you know, so y'all, Shelly, or whoever the girl may be.
Shelly?
Shaquisha?
Not Shaquisha.
And so what ends up happening, then you become a teenager, and the question was no longer, and again, it's not for all men, but in my culture, in my arena, the question was no longer, what's your girlfriend's name? The question was, how many girlfriends you have?
So we go from what's your girlfriend's name to now how many girlfriends you have. Okay. Okay.
And I'm saying that's people in my era. And so I'm not saying that's all, but that's a good majority of men who have heard those questions asked. I don't know many men at all who have not been asked those questions. I was just doing a generic questionnaire one day. When I said question, I was just asking men. I said, have you ever heard that question? How many girlfriends you have? Yeah. Have you ever heard that question when you were even younger? What's your girlfriend? Yes. And the thing is, what that did was cause us to feel as if we had to have more than one woman. And it also caused us to grow up with a very undisciplined sexual spirit.
Wow.
And so what ends up happening with that is that we ended up having a hard time, or even now, men have a hard time now being committed. And that's why we want to make sure that we talk so much about these red flags.
Right.
Because the thing about it is, if a man has not tamed, if a man has not asked God to help him to tame that, marriage won't change it. So
now that's serious right there.
How long ago did it, was that? It started when we were kids. So that's why we want to have these conversations about red flags, so that, ladies, you can hear from a man who should have been your big brother,
who could have been
how
your big
to
brother.
avoid the pitfalls of relationships and how to successfully navigate relationships the godly way, the good way. How about that?
That's it.
Uh-huh.
And it all starts with you knowing who you are first. So the better you are at loving yourself, trusting yourself, believing in yourself, the better version of you shows up, the best version of you shows up for you first, and then it shows up for other people.
So let's talk for a few minutes about what are some red flags, because I know someone's asking, what are red flags?
Yeah. So
Let's
that's
just
what we were
deal
talking
with
about
some
earlier.
of
What
the
are
red
some of those
flags.
red flags?
So let's just run down what a few of those red flags actually look like. Let's talk about what a few
Yep.
of
So
those.
we talked about the boundary issues. We talked about the low self-esteem. We talked about the jealousy. We talked about the controlling behaviors. We talked about the disrespect of disrespectful behavior. Yeah.
I want to also talk about this communication, right?
Which is huge for you.
Yeah, it's a big thing. And so we start talking about a red flag. Here's what I want you ladies to listen to. I'm talking from a man perspective now, right? Here's what a man generally does. I'm giving y'all the cheat code. A man is
I feel like the men are going to be mad at you.
That's okay. It's okay. It'll be okay. It'll be okay when the swelling goes down. So what generally happens is a man is sitting there asking all these questions about, what do you like to do? What kind of things? Where do you like to go? What do you like to eat? And they're asking these questions so that they can put together the strategy to win them over, right? But the winning them over is not so much to win them over for a committed relationship. The winning them over is simply to get them in the bedroom. So let's talk reality for a second. So for instance, when I talk about communication, if a woman was to ask a man, tell me who you are. Who are you? Don't give me your title.
Plain and simple.
Tell me who you are.
3 questions. Who are
Most
you?
men cannot answer that question. Red flag. If you can't tell me who you are outside of your title, ladies, trust me when I tell you, that's a red flag.
That's a red flag.
Not only that, if a man is emotionally unavailable as it relates to communication, that's another red flag. I mean, I can keep going on about from a number of angles as it relates to communication, because here's another thing that most women don't understand, right? When we were boys, when we fell off our bike, busted our head to the white meat, when we
Not the white meat.
scraped our arms up, the one thing that they always told us, big boys don't cry. Y'all
Right.
stop that crying.
Right.
Suck it up. It's going to be okay.
Man up.
Man up.
Mm-hmm.
This one with boys.
Right.
So what that did, the only thing that did was teach us how to keep our emotions inside of us. So now you say, okay, what's wrong? Nothing? No, I just don't know how to express my emotions because you told me as a boy to suppress your emotions. Don't say how you feel. So you have grown men at funerals who got on sunglasses trying to hold back tears because their mom, their child, or someone passed.
Right.
Why? Because it's still ingrained in their heads.
Big
I'm not
boys
supposed to
don't
cry. I'm not supposed to cry. I'm not supposed to cry.
Right.
So now in a relationship, a man doesn't know how to communicate because he just did not understand that when they told us big boys don't cry, that told us don't share your emotions.
And here we are as adult women the very thing that we want from you is for you to be emotionally available to us and share those emotions. But you hadn't even been allowed to share those emotions since you were a little boy. So the truth of the matter is, some men are emotionally unavailable because they're emotionally immature. They haven't been taught how to manage and articulate what those emotions are.
I wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So last thing we're going to talk about on this first podcast is why is it so important not to overlook red flags? Why is it so important not to
That's
overlook
good.
red flags?
Why is it so important not to overlook these red flags? Well, number one, we've been saying it the entire time. Red flags that you ignore become those flags on fire that come back and burn you. That's the first thing.
And here are some other things I want you to understand. When you start ignoring red flags, what ends up happening is you take a major chance on messing with your mental stability, your
Emotional,
spiritual, your emotional, and even sometimes your financial
physical.
and physical.
Yeah, all of
Exactly.
it. All the wellness.
So you cannot avoid or overlook red flags because it's going to cost you. And most times it costs women emotionally.
Right.
That's why the Bible says, guard your heart from,
Right, out
let me
of it.
paraphrase it, because that's what out of it flows all
Clothing
of
and
your
issues
drama.
of life. Exactly.
So, and that's why it's so important for you not to keep overlooking red flags. Some of you right now are in relationships where
Right.
you see the red flag. Matter of fact, you see the flags on fire, but you're afraid to let
To
go
put them out.
because you're trying to figure out, what am I going to do?
For
Some
fear
y'all-
of being alone.
Yes, fear of being alone. But not only that, here's another thing I want to say, and I'm going to cut this off here. That's why it's always good for a woman to be able to sustain herself, because there are so many women in
That's good.
relationships who stay in them because they don't have the resources to leave when they want to.
That's good. That's rich right there. That's a rich point right there.
Yeah. And I'll say this because, again, you got to realize that when you overlook red flags,
They're going to
they
come back.
cost you. Let's look at it like this. Okay, when you're driving, you have a stoplight in the intersection. It goes from red to yellow to green. And most of us, when we're driving, quite naturally, we know to go when it's green.
Right.
Green means go.
Right.
Yellow means caution.
Slow down.
Slow down. Pay attention. Red means stop.
Right.
But here's the problem. People see the red driving
keep
on a regular
going.
basis, especially where we live, and they go straight through the light.
Yeah, like it's a
They're
suggestion.
not even thinking about the repercussions of going through this red stoplight. And it's the same way in relationships.
That's good, honey.
People run through the red flag stoplight and then wonder why they get in a crash later on.
That's good, honey.
What?
That's good. That's good. Well, we welcome any and all questions and comments when it comes to our podcast. We are here to serve you. We thank you all for joining us on this first episode of the Red Flag Coaches podcast. Listen, we want to hear from you. If there are topics that you want the Red Flag Coaches to cover, listen, we ain't never scared. So you make sure you send us your comments and your
Yes.
topics that you
Yes.
want the Red Flag Coaches to talk about.
We'll talk about whatever you want us to talk about. But we're going to keep God in too now. But we're going to also be real, because we like to keep it real. We don't want to sugarcoat anything. We're going to tell you just like it is, straight, no chasers.
That's
So
it.
send us your questions. We'll talk about it. And we look to see you in our next podcast. Listen, I'm saying to you, support this podcast. As a matter of fact, this is what I want you to do. I want you to go to our
You're giving them
website.
homework on the first
I'm
one?
giving them homework.
Okay.
Go to
All
our
right.
website, theredflagcoach.com. Follow us on YouTube. Follow us on Instagram. Follow us on TikTok. Follow us on Facebook. Follow us on all social media platforms so that you can stay abreast of the latest red flag information. We're going to have some events coming up, and we want you to be the first to know it. I appreciate all of you for stopping in to check out this first podcast, and I promise you the best is yet to come.